Hello, everyone. Welcome to VMware Tanzu's inaugural installment of our Dev Deep Dive series. In this series, we aim to bring together experts in DevOps to discuss technical aspects of the industry and the trending topics that matter to developers. Before we get started, though, we'd like to hold a moment of silence for the victims, the families, the community in yesterday's tragedy in Texas. And if you'd like to help, we encourage you to visit gofundme.com/Texas Elementary. The link's going to be in the chat somewhere, where you can donate directly to the families impacted. So let's take a brief moment. So thank you for holding that moment of silence with us. This tragedy was very painful and disruptive, and we encourage everyone to take time to take care of themselves and their loved ones during this difficult time. So my name's V. I'm a senior product line manager at VMware Tanzu. I'm focused on our open source project, Tanzu Community Edition. Tanzu Community Edition. And today I'm joined by a stellar panel of open source experts who are here to share their experience joining and contributing to the open source community. So I'm excited to be today's moderator and to learn from and to share my own experience with open source. Follow along, and we're going to have a section for questions at the end. So as open source touches much of the world's top software, it's crucial to recognize the importance of the open source community. And over the next hour, our panel is going to discuss how to get started contributing in open source to open source software, and how to support open source communities, and what the biggest trends in open source are. Now let's get to know our three panelists to share more about their open source journeys, careers, and resources for other DevOps professionals. So let's start with Eddie. Eddie is the open source DevRel and founder of Eddie Hub. Hi, Eddie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to be here. Should I say a bit about myself?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, well, I've been in open source for over 10 years. I got started before there was Git and GitHub, so I've definitely seen it evolve over time. And thank you so much for mentioning our inclusive open source community. Eddie Hub, it's great to see so many people in the chat from there. Thank you all for coming and supporting. I'm also GitHub Star of the Year, and I'm passionate to get everyone into open source.
Thanks a bunch, Eddie. Now let's hear from Kunal, who's a developer advocate at Civo and a CNCF ambassador. Hi, Kunal. A few words about yourself. Let's see who this guy is for those who don't know you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Kunal. I work as a developer advocate at Civo, and I'm a student. I'm going to graduate in a few months, hopefully. I've been involved in a lot of communities. I love content creation. I love open source. I owe most of my career to open source. That's how I started in this field. And yeah, I'm looking forward to having a good chat and answering all of your questions.
Thanks a bunch, Kunal. And now we're going to hear from Jace. Jace is Senior Director of Open Source Software Engineer at VMware. That's a longer title than a lot, so like that's a mouthful. So Jace, what is a Senior Director of Open Source Software Engineering? What is that?
Well, it's fun because I get to figure that out. It's something that's not very common, actually, in a lot of companies, which is super cool that VMware recognizes the importance of the specific disciplines around being, both focusing on products, but also, focusing on open source projects. So I feel really fortunate to be sort of trailblazing in this space. Yeah, and in my background, I've done a lot of open source over the years, and we'll probably talk more about that as we move forward. So,
yeah, and a couple words about myself. I've done a lot of work for the Go community, especially in Brazil, and I think most of you who recognize me is from something Kubernetes, so I've been in that space for a while as well. So anyway, thanks everyone for being here today. So let's start things off by learning a little bit more about your open source journey. So we all just did a little bit of an introduction, so let's dig a bit more into that. So can each of you share a little bit about your background, which I guess we kind of already did, but what first drew you to the world of open source? So Eddie, what's your story here?
So being able to make changes and improvements to tools I was using at the time, like I said, it was over 10 years ago, and they weren't just improvements for me, but being able to allow other people to use those improvements was such a big draw for me. Like, it was amazing. And then to be part of a community that created and maintained these amazing tools. Yes, I was only contributing a small amount, but it all added up over time, and everyone's really grateful for the improvements that I added. I got to collaborate with people from around the world with different skills and experience. And I just learned so much faster and grew my network at the same time. I mean, what I love about open source was that anyone could contribute. It wasn't just about coders, and people coming with a fresh pair of eyes, fresh perspective, could ask questions, could add so much value. And open source is not just about code, especially like nowadays in 2022. Code is only a small part of it. It really focuses on the collaboration part. So it drew me back then, and it still draws me now. I love it, and that's why I'm just so passionate about getting everyone involved in open source.
Yeah, I definitely have had similar experiences. So Kunal, is your experience, was your beginning different or similar? Like, what are the parallels and maybe not parallels to what Eddie mentioned?
I think Eddie Eddie is in a different league. He's been contributing to open source before there was Git. Me, on the other hand, I started at the end of my freshman year, which was around 2019. And the motivation for me was I'm just a computer science student. I'm studying about data structures and all these other fields, looking at stuff to learn and get into. And I was like, I'm learning all these things, but I'm not getting to apply it anywhere. I'm not getting the satisfaction that I'm actually doing something. So I was attending a meetup, and over there I learned about open source and how you can contribute to projects that are being used in the real world from the comfort of your home. Felt too good to be true. And I was like, really? Like, you want me to help you? Me? And I was like, they were like, yeah, for sure. And my first project was a Kubernetes Java client. It had middleware, and I did not know anything about K8s or Docker or whatever. I just knew like a bit of Java and Maven, and I just got involved, and I was like, hey, I want to contribute. I like Java, and how can I contribute? So the community sort of like helped me, and that was like what drew me to contribute to open source, which was I needed some real world experience and needed to like contribute to projects that are being used around the world. Now that I have it, what drives me now is seeing other students who are in the same place that I was previously, sort of like helping them move forward and start their open source journey.
Okay, I think a real important point there is like, even if you're a beginner, you know some things, you don't know lots of things, there's always room, which I think it's a very important thing that we hear all the time and we pretend we didn't, but it's true. So it's good to reinforce that. Now, Jace, so I work together with Jace, so I'm just throwing all the curveballs at Jace here. So, Jace, my question to you is, we heard from Eddie, who's a very experienced contributor to open source. We heard from Kunal, who's a bit of a newer contributor to open source. And Jace, I understand that a lot of these open source communities, they're kind of like your fault. You helped build them, basically. Can you tell us a bit about that story?
Oh boy, curveballs indeed. Well, I wouldn't say I built Okay, well, I don't even know how to respond to this. First of all, a community is so much larger than one person. So in some small ways, I can say that I've helped shape some communities. I probably have most impact in Kubernetes. I think a lot of the things people sort of take for granted within Kubernetes were things that I either started or built or helped build. Things like just little things like named releases or the shadowing program and the modern release retros and a lot of things like that are all things that I was really trying to optimize inclusivity around the project. So I do think it's interesting. An interesting point about what you just said about all people and trying to make room for everyone is that when I started in Kubernetes, I didn't code. I wasn't coding anything. I was really focused on building the community out. And my intro into the project was taking notes. I literally stepped up and saw that nobody was taking notes and said, "Yeah, great." I'll do it. And then from there, it was things like, building the retro process and all that. So it just underscores how important it is, to match your desire and curiosity with a willingness to engage. And I think that that's sort of the hallmark of my involvement in open source, and I think that's for others as well. And to always know that there's a space at the table for everybody to do whatever your gift is.
Thanks a bunch, Jace. Yeah, that's super cool. All right, so moving on to a slightly different subject. So open source largely depends on developers all around the world. Not only developers, but I guess we're using developers as a catch-all term, contributors maybe. So devoting their time and skills to, of course, write code, but also all these other things that we just discussed. Now, what are some of the biggest benefits and challenges to a community-driven ecosystem? So Kunal, what's your take on this?
Obviously, like Eddie mentioned in the previous example as well, that he wanted to contribute to projects that he was using, and I believe people are the ones who drive innovation, who drive open source projects and organizations. So when it comes to like the benefits, obviously these projects are being used by so many companies. It powers, like if you talk about like Linux, for example, how great of an impact it has had. And speaking of like Kubernetes and so many other projects, right, that even many small companies, mid-sized companies, and even large-scale organizations are making use of. So definitely there's so much value when it comes to open source, and benefits on an individual level can also include you get to learn so many new things, you get to be involved in the community, and you get to contribute to real-world projects. So my answer, you may feel like coming from a beginner's point of view, but it's true. That's how we all start, and folks are also looking for people who are beginners. Being a beginner is one of the most important skills that you can have, bringing a new perspective of fresh eyes. And in the recent KubeCon, the keynotes, they were also mentioning that how much the CNCF and organizations like the projects like Kubernetes are trying to get more young people involved. So after 20 years, who is going to maintain these projects? You are going to maintain these projects. So I think that's sort of like some of the benefits. So the challenges, obviously, looking for folks to volunteer. That's one of the challenge. Maintainers trying not to get burned out. See so many companies who are addressing this issue by doing an 80%, 20% rule sort of thing. So like 20% time you can spend on open source or whatever. I know many companies who actually pay you to work on open source. Now there's the GitHub sponsors thing as well. So we are getting there. But the more the merrier when it comes to like contributions, and definitely as a beginner as well, you can contribute and be a part of the community. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to have an open mind to learn and explore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, Kunal just mentioned KubeCon. So there was a great talk at KubeCon. Well, there are many, but there's one that I really want to bring up, which was about, it was from John McBride, who's a colleague of mine and Jace, who works also on Tons of Community Edition. And he's the sole maintainer of Cobra, the very widely used Go library. And his talk was about sole maintainer open source projects, which is a huge challenge. So getting maintainers and maintaining maintainers is definitely one of the challenges there. But anyway, Jace, what's your perspective on this?
Well, it's interesting for me because having been involved with the Kubernetes project since very, very early, since the pre-1.0 things, I've seen this go from order of hundreds to now 100,000 plus folks. Like if you look at Kubernetes Slack, there's 150,000 people on Kubernetes Slack right now, which is more or less the population of Dayton, Ohio, or Pasadena, California. So imagine that you walked into a city where there's 150,000 people that are all Kubernetes contributors, and walk into any cafe or any store, and it's all contributors. And you think about in a community, all the things that can go right or wrong there happen in Kubernetes. And so that was one of the things that led us to create the Code of Conduct Committee early on. So I was part of the bootstrap effort for that and spent 2 years with that. And it really helped me understand the dynamics and challenges of cultural and other interactions that happen in that setting. Just communication, what are the community norms? Like well-meaning folks from startups would come in and start trying to pitch products on Slack, and we had to learn how to moderate those folks so that we weren't making it into a sales pitch on Slack or in other community venues. So like we've endured a lot of those growing pains over the years to sort of make this a sustainable, inclusive community. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, right? That everybody comes to this from a different place, and that's also a great opportunity too, because it really breaks the cycles of sort of overrepresentation of any particular group, and we desperately need that. We desperately need to have all voices at the table and everybody's experience honored equally, and not over-optimize or over-index on one specific demographic experience. And so I think that's the biggest challenge in community, and I think a lot of communities struggle with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and so that is definitely a huge frontier for folks to surmount in any project to be successful, and to really focus time and effort on. There's a lot of things, but I'd love to hear from Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of topics that we just touched upon that we're going to cover as we go on. So I think, like, what Jace just mentioned about communication, how like it's basically living in large groups of humans. Open source communities are just that. So communication is a big issue, and it's also a great way to get started, even if you're not if you don't have the most skills in lots of different areas, but just bringing good communication skills can be such a great start. So Eddie, benefits and challenges to a community-driven ecosystem. What's your viewpoint here?
I'm loving this discussion. It's great that we've got like 3 different people with different experiences. We've got some overlap, but also different points of view. And I think it just adds, so much value. I think it's Kunal's such a great inspiration to the younger people, that they can get involved when they're still studying and they can get a job and do all those great things. So there's just so many benefits. It is brilliant. I know Jace and me are a bit long in the tooth probably, but hopefully our perspective can also help as well. As we all said, fresh perspective, different people looking at a problem in different ways. It will just make the product, the community, like so much better. And another benefit is the opportunity to learn from each other. I can learn from everyone that's here on the panel, everyone that's in the chat. We can all share that. And sometimes we get to focus working on our kind of core team organization. So it's great to geek out with people who we might not usually meet. I think open source really bridges the gap between all of us around the world. And with different time zones, projects can progress through the day and night without us getting burnt out, right? As soon as, I think for some of you it's in the morning, for me it's like afternoon, Kunal I think is in the evening. So, and for someone else it's nighttime. So, when they wake up, they can work and we'll be resting. So we get that kind of continuous moving forward with our project. But at the same time zones can also be challenging because conversations can go over more than one day. So resolutions of issues and discussions and reviewing of pull requests can all take a little bit longer. Another challenge is the majority, as it got mentioned before, we have sponsors and so forth. The majority of the community are contributing in their own time rather than as part of their day job. I know this is changing, and it's great to see this and to be part of it. But people have family commitments, parents, children, etc. So it is definitely a challenge, and it's something that I think we need to improve. And work-life balance is super important. And so therefore projects might not get the attention that they deserve because people do need to go on holiday, do need to do all these things that they need to do. So yeah, it's interesting times, and now we're talking about these things. I think it's getting a lot better and a lot more transparent.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Eddie. I have definitely experienced, little emergencies where I had to be up until 2, 3 in the morning because of the time zone issue. So there are definitely challenges there, but I agree that it's great that these things are all under active discussion right now. So there is a good chance they're going to keep improving. Now, moving on to the next topic. So we tend to talk a lot in open source about deliverables in a sense, be that code or documentation or meeting notes, anything like that. But there's also a big aspect to open source, which is discussion and conversation. So one of the key things about open source is when you get stuck on something, you always have someone to ask for help. And that's something that we should not, just let go. It's something worth discussing. So next question, and let's start with Jace. Can you share a time when the open source community helped you move a project forward, or an example of how this type of collaboration impacted you personally?
Sorry, I keep going back to Kubernetes, but it's a pretty canonical example of a lot of these things because it's such a great project. But I remember the early days back when I was at Deis, and Deis was one of the original pioneers of cool things in Kubernetes. It was sort of the Kubernetes Now What open source organization. So we built Helm and some other things, Brigade, and one of the things that I was doing there was helping early enterprises that were trying to get on Kubernetes and be successful with it. And the things we take for granted now, which just simply didn't exist back then. So things like provisioning clusters and lifecycle management of clusters was really, really complicated. And so I was trying to understand how to build the code to do that and to programmatically create clusters and whatnot. And I was stuck, and I spent a lot of time talking to other people on GitHub and in Slack and whatnot around how to collaborate around that space. And it was the first time where I was like, wow, this is a problem that isn't really solved, that a lot of people have really diverse opinions on how to do it. And so it was a really rich ecosystem for me to learn in and to really expose areas that I didn't have full understanding of the technical aspects of Kubernetes. And honestly, that work, the interactions with other people in this community still serves me today. Like the things that I learned 7 years ago are still just as valid today. So it really illustrates how those interactions in GitHub or in Slack or back in the day it was IRC or whatever. Like this is all like very, very foundational to your understanding, because I think that reading something is good, but having somebody explain it to you and to have it translated into a way that you can interact with them and clarify and use your curiosity to drive your understanding of it is just priceless. And so I think that for anybody in their learning journey in this technology or any technology that's open source, that is something, use that to your advantage and find ways to interact with people who are like-minded. And I'd say that contributors of all experience levels, myself included, and then people that I know that are senior maintainers, love sharing this information with you. Like, don't assume that people are not approachable or that they won't help you in your journey and have those conversations. So assume that people do want to help you wherever you're at.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Chase. Quick little story about myself. When I was getting started with Kubernetes code, there were a lot of things that I found really complicated, and I learned to code by coding. I didn't go to school. I didn't know the names of things. I would just look at code and figure it out. At some point, I was having a lot of difficulties, and one of the maintainers of kubectl at the time, he kind of walked me through it, and he was like, well, these are basically design patterns, from that book, Design Patterns. And then I was like, oh, so this did not need to be this complicated. It's just doing that thing. And he was like, yep, exactly. Then I caught up on learning and studying, and that just made everything make sense to me. But this aspect that Jace mentioned of having someone walk you through it, it's really magic. Eddie, what's your experience with this? How have your conversations been going related to? Well, you get the point.
Yeah. Well, I had an answer prepared, but after you mentioned, open source is more about collaboration. I love that, because when we start contributing, getting involved in the discussion, right? It might be in a Discord, it might be on discussions on GitHub, but it's definitely communication and collaboration. And then once we find out what changes we want to make to the project, I say changes, not code, then we continue the conversation in an issue. And then once we make changes, we make a pull request. So a pull request is like an issue, but with changes to the project. So it's discussion or Discord, GitHub discussion or Discord, which is collaboration. And then you have an issue, which is collaboration. And then you have a pull request, which is like an issue with changes, which is collaboration and reviewing the changes. So there's a lot of collaboration going on, and code or changes to tests or documentation is such a small part. But yes, so going back to answer your actual question was, one of my passions is making an open source alternatives to existing projects. So on a YouTube live stream, I created a link-free project, which is what the community called it, and it's an open source alternative to Linktree, which is the platform that gives you one link to rule them all, I think is what they say. And within a few days, I was getting hundreds of contributions, and my GitHub notifications were exploding even further. And I couldn't. I didn't have the bandwidth to get back to people in a sensible time. I'm still really behind in my notifications, so sorry everyone, I am working on it. So what I did though to solve it was add maintainers to the project from the Eddie Hub community. And this allowed us to remove the bottleneck of me and allow the project to progress really fast. And several months later, the Linktree project has grown so much, and we're always encouraging people to contribute. And not only that, to review other people's pull requests, because their fresh pair of eyes, as we've all said so many times, can really make us keep the changes straightforward and simple. If something doesn't make sense, well, why doesn't it make sense? Do we need to improve the documentation? Is the code too complicated, or is the test too complicated, and so forth? So sharing their point of view is super valuable. So if it wasn't for the community, the Linktree project wouldn't be where it is today. So a big shout out to the community, the open source community and the Eddie Hub community for allowing us to move that forward. And every time I go look at it, there are new features that have been added all the time, which is just, super interesting and exciting.
Yeah, I think the best thing is when you contribute to a project a little bit and you're like, oh, I really wish it could do that, but it's so much work. And then you forget about it. You come back a few months later and it's there and you're like, oh, wow, okay, thanks. Kunal, I'm just going to...
Oh, sorry, V.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Ahead.
I was just going to add that that's so true. But what I also like is when people break it down, they say, well, that's actually a big piece of work, but I could do this little bit. And then someone else says, well, I can do that little bit. And then before you know it, you've got 4 or 5 people even collaborating on a pull request, and then the feature gets done together. And I just love seeing that. It always makes me super happy to see those pull requests.
Yeah, so as a product manager, I just want to say, from what you heard, if you're a product manager, you can tell that there's room for you in open source projects as well. Breaking down work into pieces and doing that organizational effort helps a lot for other contributors as well. Now I'm going to just read the topic of discussion again and then pass it on to you, Kunal. So what we're talking about is, can you share a time when the open source community helped you move a project forward, or an example of how this type of collaboration impacted you personally?
I think what we've been saying, again and again, is that open source is all about collaboration and people and stuff. So when I recall when I first started, I got stuck a lot of times. Like, saw the code base and I was like, yeah, that's not going to work out. Ain't going to happen. But then I sort of realized that all these people who are contributing, they were also getting started at a particular point in time. So I've gotten stuck quite a lot, but the community has always been there to help. And that's sort of what I realized, that this is a good part of the imposter syndrome. When you find yourself in a place where you don't know much about one thing. So imposter syndrome it doesn't mean I don't know anything. It basically means I know something else. They're working on something else. So you can see that as a great opportunity to learn and contribute, because setting examples for great open source communities, they are very inclusive. It does not matter. So questions I get, Kunal, can you suggest a beginner friendly project to contribute to? Why do you need a beginner friendly project? What do you mean by beginner friendly? You can contribute to Kubernetes if you don't know a single line of code. Kubernetes is extremely beginner friendly. You can contribute to documentation, no code platform. You can take part in the shadow program. There's so much things you can do. So this idea that bigger projects are only for, not newcomers, I think that's not true. And that's something that I have also seen in my own experience. And communication plays a very key role, especially so all the good active open source projects, they have their own Slack channels or whatever where folks can join in. One more thing we did not mention was they also have office hours. So there are various SIG meetings. If you want to get involved in a particular SIG, You can just join in. And that's what I did. So when I was starting to contribute to Kubernetes, 1 month I did nothing. I was just attending SIG meetings. That's it. I was just listening to people and seeing what they're working on. After 1 month, folks were like, "Hey, we want to write a blog about this thing or whatever." I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I did that. But that's just basically, what I want to answer with this question is that you will get stuck. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're a student, it's a good thing, because you're getting stuck means now you'll learn something new, and more skills you'll gain, more experiences you'll gain. So take it as a good opportunity to learn and contribute. And any questions you may have, ask the community. But just one last point I'd like to mention is asking good questions is very important when it comes to working remotely or contributing to open source. Don't just send a hi or something. Most folks who are just getting started do that. Frame your question, research a lot before asking the question. Say something like, "I tried this. This is what I'm stuck on. This is what I got, and now what do I do?" So make it easy for people to help you, because they are also working on open source, like on their own time. And yeah, ask questions in public and have an open mind to learn and explore. That's it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So another little very silly experience of mine in this regard is, to me, the coolest moment ever when having like just random conversations in open source is when I learned to code. It was just, you and a book. There was no like internet all the time. It was like, you and a book. So I learned to code basically on Notepad. I didn't know about any IDEs or, that kind of stuff because nobody told me. And 10 years later, when I, was relatively experienced as a programmer, then somebody showed me, oh yeah, here's all these tools to, do all the busy work of like, where's this function defined, etc. That was so mind-blowing to me. I'm grateful to this day, and it's been decades at this point. But anyway, moving on to the next topic. So the majority of the world's top organizations use open source for a variety of reasons. And now what we want to move towards is, what trends are we seeing about in businesses joining and supporting open source communities? And what are some examples that you have of organizations that are joining open source in a way that is thoughtful and that really contributes to the community? So let's get started with Jace.
This is a great question and super relevant, especially for the cloud native landscape. I think that with Kubernetes, especially, and cloud native landscape generally speaking, we've seen this really big shift where the posture of open source in people's infrastructure deployments is much more important from a business agility perspective. So I think that companies are much more cognizant of the decision to move into open source. Whereas before, 20, 25 years ago, you'd use open source more out of convenience or because it allowed you to rapidly prototype, and those decisions were made more of an individual contributor layer. So, your classic system administrations or ops folks might select an open source solution for X, Y, or Z. And now you see some of these decisions to pivot to open source solutions being made at the C level. The companies are unambiguously saying open source is a critical part of what we want to do. There are tons of big companies doing this well. So I worked at Google, and I was in the middle of this firsthand and saw how Google built out and treated open source as a critical component and open APIs. And it was a really enabling thing for customers. And VMware is doing that. Even companies like Apple that used to struggle a little bit with their relationship to open source are starting to really embrace this. Like, this is a big deal. So companies, seeing the value in this and really embracing their own customers' needs for this is a huge thing. I love that we're focused on agility, like as an industry, because what happens is, and I've managed shops where this has been true as well, where developers are doing great work and they can't get their stuff to production, or the features don't get enough momentum to meet a business need in a critical time frame. And all this innovation in open source and cloud native especially in DevOps is creating the ability to iterate and prototype and create new value for customers and for our customers' customers in ways that has just been inconceivable 10 years ago. So super exciting. This is a great time to be involved in this technology.
Thanks a lot, Chase. And yeah, definitely, I think we've been as a community, we see more and more companies that were not usually traditionally associated with open source, like starting entire orgs and departments in their companies to really support community and open source projects. So that's really cool. Eddie, what's your take on this?
I think Jace just said it perfectly, which is now is a super exciting time to get involved in open source. You know, we can stand out from the crowd. Companies are, as Jace mentioned, creating divisions. Apple's a great example. So of someone new to it or newer to it, let's say. So super exciting. And also with GitHub sponsors, it's easier for people to contribute to projects and people. And so I think yesterday or today got released in India as well. So I think it might be up to like 40 or so countries now where people and companies can donate to open source contributors, and GitHub takes no commission, so 100% is received by the person. And I've even seen companies such as Daily.dev and SEMA who are supporting community members by donating to people through GitHub sponsors, which I think is amazing. You know, some people do it as a $25 a month. Repeating every month. Others do it as a one-off donation. But it all adds up, and it's great to see companies getting involved in this and not just other developers supporting other developers. I've seen some companies do it with a budget, so they say to their employees, you've got a budget of, I don't know, say $500 a month, and you can give it to people in the open source community. And some people might do larger lump sums to less people or smaller amounts to more people. I just think that's just amazing that it's a great way to do that, and empowering their employees to support the open source community, especially because a lot of people do it in their spare time as well. So it's super exciting, and it's going to get even more super exciting. So I can't wait to see what else happens.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Eddie. I think it's definitely super interesting, this capability, let's say, that we're seeing lately of empowering individual developers. I think especially companies generally think in terms of groups and teams and projects, but it's super interesting to see the emergence as well of the individual contributor being recognized for their sometimes full-time even effort there. So Kunal, what are the highlights for you in this area?
Yeah, I'm not gonna repeat what JC and Eddie already said. So they've given some great examples. I'll just give another perspective about companies, how they're supporting open source. So there are so many programs that are being started by so many organizations to get more folks involved in the community and open source. So like CNCF takes part in like the LFX mentorship programs, Google Summer of Code, Outreachy. I believe you were a part of Outreachy as well. Other than that, the Kubernetes has the Shadow program, all sorts of things. A few of these programs also offer like a stipend to students that they can use during their degree to help support the work that they're doing. These programs are not just about like getting selected and getting over with it. It's about staying with the organization that you wanted to contribute to, if you have time, or if you want to like just be in touch. And it's not just like you just got into the program and 2 months passed away and then that's it. So these opportunities are being created for you to to get more newcomers involved in the open source ecosystem. And I think that is something that companies are doing like it's pretty well. And I'm seeing so many other programs that are starting like every year, especially with the pandemic thing, with the COVID situation. Many folks, including me, lost their internships because of COVID. I lost one at Google, North America. So there were some organizations that came forward and they were like, hey, we're starting something new. Like MLH, they started their own fellowship program, and then it's just been like so many folks who are running this. So I'm happy to see that, and I think now it's a trend. It's only going to move forward, and yeah, it's a great way to support newcomers, and yeah, it's pretty good work.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Kunal. Yeah, definitely true what Kunal said. I did Outreachy It was in between 2017 and 2018, I think, and I started doing Kubernetes stuff back then, and I've been doing Kubernetes stuff ever since. So it's definitely a great way to get people to come in the community and to stay. So it's something I'm personally very grateful for. But Kunal also touched on the topic of how external things are making changes to how open source works. Kunal mentioned the pandemic and how some things were not viable anymore and some new things have emerged. So let's take a minute to discuss that. So when we take into account these external trends, these things that are like completely unrelated to open source, but that affect open source anyway, because we're all stuck in the same little planet. How have movements like hybrid work, decentralization of technical talent, we talked before about time zones and how everything is more global now as opposed to centralized in a few places. What is y'all's take on how this has shaped the growth of how open source progresses? Eddie, how do you see this going?
What's happened over the last couple of years has obviously been devastating, but it definitely has accelerated this whole remote working and making the world a smaller place. And I think that's been amazing. Like if someone wants to work for a particular company, be it Apple or Google or whatever it is, or VMware, Tanzu, before you had to like live closer to that company's office, or you had to relocate potentially to a different country, which can be a limiting factor for a lot of people. But now with all these kind of, I say, modern changes, there's such huge benefit, not just to the individual, but also to the company as well. The company hiring, they've got a bigger pool of talent that they can select from. So it's and also with teams moving towards self-managed, removing the bottlenecks and gatekeepers, projects are rapidly iterating like forward and forward all the time, like roll forward approach rather than back in the day when it was kind of can we roll back and so forth. So they'll be able to deliver features and benefits to the community and the users a lot faster. And companies are learning from open source that things can be async. We don't always have to be having all these meetings all the time. People can work in their own time zones and can just work asynchronously, which I think is amazing, because open source doesn't care what people are wearing, what the weather is, or what time zone you're in, I said the weather already, but so many other things, right? Open source just cares kind of that you visit once in a while and just get involved in the conversation and provide value. So the world is definitely getting smaller, and I think people should look at getting involved in open source, not only to learn faster, but to grow their network and contribute to the companies that they want to get involved in, because these companies are hiring from their open source projects.
Yep, definitely +1 to all of that. Kunal, what are the highlights here for you?
When the pandemic hit, that is when I realized that folks have been working remotely for the past 10-20 years. I thought that it was only because of remote like the pandemic thing, but it's actually been going on since like decades. I talked to so many folks at KubeCon. I was like, "Oh, you work remotely because of pandemic?" No, I've been working remotely like it's been a decade or something. I think this is good, at least from my experience, that now companies can hire more diverse talent from around the globe without many restrictions. At least what I have seen, and I'm a huge believer in so that there are barriers everywhere, not just in tech. And many folks reach out like, "Hey, I want to apply to this company. They're not hiring me because I don't have a tech degree. I want to apply to this company. They're not hiring me because I don't have this or that." So these are sort of things you will find not just in tech, in every aspect of life. And the way I look at it is that's okay. You should definitely then go to some other places where they would value what you have to offer. You don't have much to lose out on. I mean, it's if the company is not very inclusive, that's something that they have to work with. But yeah, the remote work culture and the hybrid environment, it has opened a lot of doors of opportunities for such folks who are looking to get expand their horizons out of their country and just work with people around the world. Also, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, you get to work with people around the world. You get to learn about their experiences and the cultural backgrounds, and they bring new perspective. So like beginners bring new perspective, people from various backgrounds also bring different perspectives, which is 100% something that the organization can benefit from. So I think both in terms of attracting new talent and in raising the diversity and inclusion for your organization, I think the remote and hybrid work environment has been a big plus point in both of these scenarios.
Yeah, those are great points. I gotta say though, I do miss sometimes just having lunch or coffee with my colleagues.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's
Q,
nice,
KubeCon
but
brought all of that back. Like when you're meeting folks in person, so that's definitely, you miss folks in person. That's one thing.
yeah, I was at a coffee shop today just thinking, it would be so nice if I could just talk to all my coworkers here. But I think that the pluses outweigh the cons. So Jace, what do you think?
Yeah, to all that, it's such great. I'm really thankful to be among such wonderful panelists here that say everything I'm thinking, and then I'm like, okay, now what am I going to say? I will say that to Kunal's point though about inclusion is something really interesting. Is that a lot of people who have, like Eddie mentioned, family commitments, taking care of elders or children or whatnot, that they having rigid meeting times or working in a very structured way is often challenging. And frankly, the more we master the art of getting really good at letting people work on times that are convenient for them, we see a flourishing of productivity and not the opposite. And in fact, I think that's the big learning here is like, a lot of companies were like, no, we can't have distributed workforce because productivity will plummet and everybody will be, off doing things instead of working. And how we know if they're working if we don't see them? And it's like, well, surprise, surprise. Not only did productivity not decline, it actually went through the roof in a lot of companies. Now, there's a lot of other factors there to consider. But frankly, what it did was it debunked conclusively the myth that working at home is tied in any way to your productivity. It turns out that people who are excited by their jobs and work on things that they enjoy and have teams even distributed that they enjoy working with is the biggest factor in productivity. Having a boss that you really cherish and promotes your career growth and it excites you about your job and understands, like in the case of open source, the specific things that it takes to be successful in open source. That is a huge mark of productivity and successfulness in these hybrid and other types of working environments. So, like, I think we can let go of those myths. Like the next generation of work can be successful in both models. I think to double down on what other folks have said, working in person is also really great, but it's not table stakes. It's not mandatory. It doesn't drive any specific outcome. It's just a tool that we can employ to make people more successful and have better trust relationships with their coworkers. So yeah, it's great. This is, again, a great time to be involved in all these things.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Jace, and definitely agree with what everyone has just said. Now, one thing that people at home watching this, especially those who are new to open source and who are like hearing a lot of these things for the first time and starting to think, what, maybe this is something I should get involved in. So we talked about a lot of things that are great about open source, and I think everybody in the audience is thinking like, oh, I really need to get into this. I need to get started. So let's talk a bit about that. Now, before we get into it, we have saved some time to have at the end for live questions. So if you have something catching fire in your mind and you want us to address it, leave your comments in the chat, and we will do our best. But for our final prepared question of the day, so as we understand that a lot of people are trying to get into open source and to carve their little bit of space there, can you offer some words of advice for someone just getting started? Maybe it's a practice or way of doing things, or what is the best project? Somebody's gonna ask. So what are your words of encouragement for people getting started? So Kunal, what do you have to say?
I believe there are millions of developers around the world, and everyone has a different story. The hundreds of thousands of open source contributors, everyone has a different story of how they got involved in it. I can't really give a roadmap to it, but some things that everyone may have in common is the best way to get started is just to get started, because if you haven't gotten started right now, you yourself do not know what sort of questions you need answers to. So once you get started, then you will find questions, and then you will get answers from the community. It also, speaking of like, what we should learn, what software and requirements and all these other things, prerequisites, heavily depends on project to project and what sort of contributions you're looking to get out of. And once you just get involved, just send a message like, hey, I'm a beginner, I want to get started with it. The community will be there to help you out. Documentation plays a crucial role. This is for the project maintainers. If you want to attract folks to contribute to your project, definitely you can have good documentation. Or if you want to contribute to a project that does not have good documentation, you can maybe contribute in the documentation. So there's, like, you can see so many mixes and matches that I can make and give you 100 different answers. But the best way to get started is just to get started. And I know that's not really an answer, so I'll add on a little bit more of points. The second point I'd like to mention is be optimistic and have an open mind to like learn and explore, try out new things. And another point that I want to mention is that ask good questions. You'll get stuck, like we mentioned in the previous question. So learn how to ask good questions and learn how to research, and they're going to help you if you get stuck, but you have to show in some efforts as well. And last but not least, there is something that most folks struggle with. Have some patience. It's not going to happen overnight. If you're looking forward to contribute to a big project and you're just getting started out, it will take some time, but it will be worth it. So most folks lose motivation because they're not able to make much contributions instantly. And don't worry about that. Like, it's going to take time, but it will be fine. Just keep progressing towards it. But yeah, ask good questions, get involved, and you will find more questions, then you'll find more answers, and then you'll become a maintainer or a project contributor or whatever you like. Just one last point is, this is pretty straightforward. Like, you're looking to contribute to a new project, use it first, like what it does. Then try to run it on your local system, like build the project, the source code or whatever, go through the docs, some examples, use it, ask questions, ask why is this happening. And the point is, folks often ask me, how do you understand such a large code base? You don't have to understand the entire code base. It's oftentimes like divided into modules and packages and stuff. Just having a basic understanding of how things are working or the architecture and stuff should work, and learn by doing. So learn while contributing. It's not like I will learn about every single file in this project, then I'll start with the first issue. That'll take you, I don't know how much time, and it's not efficient. So learn while contributing. Start with like good first issues, then build your way on above it, and you can contribute to documentation. You can look at the test cases of projects. Test cases are good. That's how I do it. When I'm given a new project, I look at test cases. That's it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks a bunch, Kunal. I think something that people sometimes mention as well, that's a great guideline. So just putting it out there. If you're interested in open source, you probably use a lot of open source tools, projects, etc. So whenever you catch yourself thinking, I could do this better, and it doesn't matter what it is, maybe the documentation, the code, or just helping with organization of how the process is managed. Anytime you catch yourself thinking, I could do this better, please do. We would love it if you would come in and do it better than we do. So Jace, what's your advice?
As somebody who struggles a lot with imposter syndrome, I think the advice is to always lead with a service mindset. So something that I've found is sort of the magic key to unlocking any challenge when you have imposter syndrome is you walk into something, if you're thinking about this is about me, you're gonna struggle, because then you're centering on what is am I good enough, am I blah blah blah. But if you focus instead on how can I be in service to the other people, how can I be in service to this community, how can I be in service to this technology, then you divest yourself from thinking about how am I good enough, blah blah blah. It's really about, if there's something that needs to be done, you step in and do it. And if it's something that's aligned with your skill set or slightly above, then you find ways to learn how to help. And I think that helping mindset, that service mindset, is critical for success in open source, because you have to be focused on other folks, not yourself. And in Kubernetes, I love it. One of the project values is project over company. And in fact, a lot of people in Kubernetes say, I don't work for this company, I work for Kubernetes first. And the company is the one that pays my paycheck. And that's a little flip, right? I mean, but the truth is that really, when you're working in the project, when you're part of the project, you are acting on behalf of the community. And there is a very strong antibody reaction to people who come in and try and push an agenda that is for a company. So like, this is not just words or ideas. This is actually practice in the open source projects. So when I say, you know, you want to become part of a project, come with curiosity, come with a service first mindset, and then just ask, how can I help? For me, it was the first thing was nobody was taking notes. So literally that's something I could do. And I spelled people's names wrong and I did all that. But you know what? The next meeting I spelled less people's name wrong and so forth. So like that's how it works. One thing at a time.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Community comes first. Eddie, what's your take on this? I guess we're wrapping up the prepared questions. So like everything that we all forgot, Eddie, it's all on you now.
No pressure. Well, I want to reiterate what's been said already. Get started today. Like literally, don't say tomorrow, everyone. I know you're all watching here and you're thinking, I'll do it tomorrow. No. Today, wherever you are in your journey, even if you're 1 month in, 1 day in, you don't need to really, you just need to have a GitHub account. And all for that, all that you need is an email address. It's free to set up and get started. You can join in the conversation on there. You can look at the contributing file to see where they also chat. It'll probably be in the main README. You can chat in Discord with them. Just get involved in the conversation. Then you're going to learn more about the project, more about their process. I mean, so many great tips have been said already about, you know, look at projects that maybe you're familiar with already, because that will help. And all these terms, commit, pull requests, they all sound really daunting at first, but the important thing is to have a play, like literally click around. You can't do anything wrong. The worst case is you make a few extra notifications for the maintainers, but you'll learn from it and you won't do it again, but you won't ruin anyone's project, so don't worry. And worst case is you create an issue or you create a pull request and the maintainer closes it. Trust me, it will still rain in London tomorrow and it'll still be hot in Bali tomorrow as well. So you'll be fine. But there are so many free resources out there to get involved. I, for myself, have a free course that you can do. And I also put out loads of content on Twitter and YouTube. And that's why I started the open source community, Eddie Hub. We create a safe place for people who want to get started in open source. And literally on day one, they've started contributing, and we have various projects for you to get started on, so you can practice the workflow and then challenge yourself a little bit more. And the community are there to help. So a big shout out to the open source community and the Eddie Hub community. They really want to help you, and they are super, super supportive. And that's why I call it the inclusive open source community. And if you have any questions for us, hopefully we're going to answer some now. But if you have any other questions for us after this live stream, feel free to reach out to us. We'll all want to answer your questions. But I ask for a favor. Don't send us DMs. Ask in public, so therefore other people can get involved in the conversation. Other people can learn from the questions and answers. So it's really, really important to ask in public.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eddie. That was great. All right, so we're moving to the final words here. Unfortunately, the conversation was too good. And, you know, when it's a good conversation, time flies. So we are running out of time. We're going to be unable to do the live questions. Like Eddie said, feel free to tag us on Twitter, and we're going to do our best to address your questions. I think the organizers have put our Twitter handles on the chat. And also, you can tag VMware Tanzu on Twitter, and then we can continue the discussion there. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today for our first ever Dev Deep Dive series, our discussion about open source, about building what's next together. So Eddie, Kunal, and Jace, it's been an absolute pleasure sharing this hour with you. Thanks so much for taking the time to share your experience with open source and how we can work together. Thanks so much to our live audience for all your engagement in the chat, etc. Hopefully we can continue the conversation a bit longer on Twitter now. And if you're interested in connecting more, we're going to have okay, now I'm reading the script and it has things that I already mentioned. So our social media profiles are going to be in the chat, so feel free to connect there. And if you want to dive deeper into the world of DevOps, we'd love to have you join us for the upcoming virtual DevOps Loop conference on Wednesday, June 22nd. Registration is free, and we're going to have a link in the chat for that as well. So to learn more about the VMware Tanzu portfolio, visit tanzu.vmware.com/tanzu. The link's hopefully going to be in the chat too. And thanks, everyone. And with that, we are wrapping up. Thanks, everyone.